The sun beat down on the dusty plains, baking the earth a pale, cracked brown. Heat shimmered off the horizon, blurring the line between the sky and the land. In the midst of this desolate landscape, a lone figure toiled. Caleb Morrison, a man weathered by grief and etched with sorrow, swung a pickaxe with grim determination. Each strike echoed in the vast emptiness, a lonely rhythm marking his descent into despair. He wasn't building a house or a barn or anything meant for life. He was digging his own grave. His clothes were faded and worn, his beard long and unkempt, streaked with dust and gray. His eyes, once bright and full of life, were now dull and distant, reflecting a pain too deep for words. The loss of his family had hollowed him out, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. He sought only oblivion, a final escape from the memories that haunted him day and night. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow with a calloused hand. The grave was deep enough. Almost. He leaned on the pickaxe, catching his breath, the silence broken only by the buzzing of flies. He thought of his wife, Sarah, her laughter like wind chimes in the summer breeze. He remembered his daughter, Lily, her small hand clutching his as they walked through fields of wildflowers. All gone, taken too soon. He spat on the ground, a bitter taste in his mouth. He was ready to join them, ready to finally rest. He picked up the shovel, ready to smooth the sides of his earthen tomb. It was then he heard it, a faint sound carried on the wind, a sound that didn't belong in this desolate place, a sound that would change everything. Voices, small voices, children's voices. The children's voices were faint, like whispers carried on the wind, but Caleb heard them. He straightened up, his senses sharpening despite his despair. He wasn't sure if he was imagining things. Maybe it was the heat or the grief playing tricks on his mind, but he couldn't ignore the possibility. He shaded his eyes with his hand, scanning the horizon. Nothing, just the endless expanse of dry grass and scrub brush. He listened again. There it was, a giggle, definitely children. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to continue his task, to finally find peace in the embrace of the earth. But something inside him, a flicker of the man he used to be, wouldn't let him. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing, not when there were children in need. He dropped the shovel and started walking towards the sound, his movements stiff and awkward at first, as if his body had forgotten how to move with purpose. But as he walked, his stride grew stronger, his eyes more focused. The voices grew louder, more distinct. He could hear snippets of conversation, childish laughter mixed with hushed tones of fear. He topped a small rise and saw them. 5 young girls, huddled together in a small clearing, their faces smudged with dirt, their clothes torn and ragged. They looked like frightened birds, ready to take flight at the slightest sound. They were clearly exhausted, their small bodies slumped with fatigue. As he approached, they noticed him. Their eyes widened with alarm, and they scrambled to their feet, ready to run. He stopped, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. He didn't want to scare them. He just wanted to help. "It's okay," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." He took a step closer, then stopped again, giving them space. "Are you girls all right? Are you lost?" The smallest of the girls, no older than 6, peeked out from behind the others. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted nervously between Caleb and the open plains behind him. She clutched a worn rag doll tightly in her arms, its painted face faded and cracked. We ain't lost, mister," said a slightly older girl, her voice trembling but firm. She seemed to be the leader of the group. "We runned away." "Run away from where?" Caleb asked, his voice softening. He knelt down, trying to appear less intimidating. "From the orphanage," the girl replied, her voice barely a whisper. "The orphanage?" Caleb frowned. He knew the place. A grim, imposing building on the outskirts of town. It had a reputation for being a harsh place, but he'd never heard anything about children running away. "It's not a good place," another girl chimed in, her voice filled with fear. They're mean." Caleb could see the fear in their eyes, the genuine terror that gripped them. He knew what it was like to be trapped in a place filled with pain and despair. He understood their desperation to escape. "Are they looking for you?" he asked. The girls nodded in unison, their eyes darting nervously around the clearing. "They'll come," the leader said, her voice filled with dread. "They always do." Caleb looked at the girls, at their worn clothes, their tired faces, their unwavering fear. He thought of his own daughter, Lily. What would he have done if she had been in their situation? He knew he couldn't turn them away. He couldn't leave them to face whatever horrors they had escaped. "Come with me," he said, standing up. "I have a place not far from here. You'll be safe there." The girls hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But they had nowhere else to go. They looked at each other, their eyes silently communicating. Finally, the leader nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "We'll go with you." Caleb led the girls towards his small, dilapidated cabin, the setting sun casting long shadows across the plains. They walked slowly, their small legs struggling to keep up with his longer strides. He adjusted his pace, mindful of their exhaustion. The cabin was little more than a shack, really. A single room with a leaky roof and walls that had seen better days. But it was shelter, and for the moment, that was all that mattered. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished. A rickety table, a couple of chairs, and a cot in the corner. A small fireplace provided the only source of heat. Caleb hadn't bothered to keep it tidy. What was the point? He gestured for the girls to sit down. They huddled together on the floor, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. He noticed how thin they were, their ribs showing through their tattered clothes. They probably hadn't had a decent meal in days. "I'll make you something to eat," he said, rummaging through his meager supplies. He found some beans and a few strips of dried meat. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As he cooked, the girls watched him in silence, their eyes never leaving his face. He could feel their fear, their uncertainty. They didn't know him. They didn't know if they could trust him. The leader, who introduced herself as Sarah, spoke up. "Why are you helping us, mister?" she asked, her voice cautious. Caleb paused, stirring the beans. He wasn't sure how to explain it. He wasn't even sure he understood it himself. I lost my family a while back," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I know what it's like to be alone and scared. I don't want you to go through that." He looked at Sarah, at her brave face and her worried eyes. He saw a spark of hope in her, a flicker of resilience that reminded him of his own daughter. He knew he had to protect them. He had to give them a chance. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here for you." The beans were simmering over the fire, filling the small cabin with a warm, savory scent. The girls, their initial fear somewhat subsided, ate quietly, their small hands clutching their bowls. Caleb watched them, his heart aching for their plight. Once they had finished eating, Sarah cleared her throat, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Mr. Caleb," she said, using his name for the first time, "there's something you need to know. Why they're really after us." Caleb leaned forward, his attention fully focused on her. "What is it?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at the other girls. They nodded, urging her on. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. We saw something," she said. "At the orphanage. Something we weren't supposed to see." "What did you see?" Caleb asked, his voice low and urgent. "We saw Mr. Harding, the man who runs the orphanage. He killed someone," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "He shot him, right in the office." Caleb's eyes widened in shock. Harding, a pillar of the community, a man who was supposed to care for orphan children? A murderer? Who did he kill? Caleb asked. "A man. A stranger," Sarah replied. "He came to the orphanage asking questions. About the money. About where it was going." "And Harding killed him to keep him quiet?" Caleb asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "We were hiding in the closet," she said. "We saw everything. And Harding saw us. He knows we saw him." "That's why you ran?" Caleb asked. "Yes," Sarah said. "We knew he'd come after us. He wouldn't let us tell anyone what we saw." Caleb sat back, stunned by what he had just heard. The girls weren't just running from a harsh orphanage. They were running for their lives. They were witnesses to a murder, and they were being hunted by a ruthless man who would stop at nothing to silence them. He knew then that protecting them would be far more dangerous than he had imagined. But he couldn't back down now. He had made a promise, and he wasn't about to break it. Sleep did not come easily that night. The girls, exhausted as they were, tossed and turned on the floor, their nightmares a silent symphony of fear. Caleb sat by the window, watching the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the plains. He wrestled with his conscience. He had promised to protect them, but what had he gotten himself into? He was just one man, a broken man at that, against a powerful and ruthless enemy. Harding had money, influence, and a law on his side. Caleb had nothing but a rusty rifle and a burning desire to do what was right. A part of him, the part that longed for oblivion, urged him to turn the girls over to the authorities. Let them deal with Harding. It wasn't his fight. He had suffered enough. Why risk his life, his peace, for a lost cause? He could disappear again, retreat back into his solitude, and let the world take care of itself. But another part of him, the part that still remembered what it meant to be human, refused to let him abandon them. He thought of Lily, his daughter. If she were in their place, wouldn't he want someone to help her? Wouldn't he want someone to stand up for her, even if it meant risking everything? He closed his eyes, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. He was tired of fighting, tired of grieving, tired of living. But he couldn't ignore the plea in the girl's eyes, the desperate hope that he represented. He knew what he had to do. He had to protect them. He had to stand up to Harding, no matter the cost. He had to find a way to bring him to justice, to ensure that the girls were safe. He stood up, his decision made. He walked over to the fireplace and stirred the embers, watching the flames flicker and dance. He knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous. But he was no longer alone. He had a purpose again, and he wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in his way. He had a promise to keep, and this time he wouldn't fail. The next morning, Caleb rose before dawn, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. He stoked the fire, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and began to plan. He knew that Harding wouldn't waste any time sending men after the girls. He had to be ready. He started by reinforcing the cabin. He boarded up the windows, leaving small slits for visibility. He strengthened the door with extra planks of wood. He gathered rocks and piled them near the door and windows, creating makeshift barricades. "What are you doing, Caleb?" Sarah asked, watching him with wide eyes. "Making sure we're safe," he replied, his voice grim. "Harding's men will be coming. We need to be ready for them." He showed the girls how to load and fire his rifle, teaching them basic self-defense. He knew it was a lot to ask of them, but they had to be prepared to protect themselves if necessary. He emphasized that the rifle was only to be used as a last resort. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Caleb felt a growing sense of unease. He knew that Harding's men could arrive at any moment. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. He told the girls to stay inside the cabin, away from the windows. He took up a position by the door, his rifle in hand, his senses on high alert. He was ready to face whatever came his way. He wasn't just protecting the girls. He was protecting himself. He was protecting his newfound purpose. He didn't have to wait long. In the distance, he saw a cloud of dust rising from the plains. As the cloud drew closer, he could make out the shapes of several men on horseback. They were armed, and they were heading straight for the cabin. "They're here," Caleb said, his voice low and tense. "Get ready." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He knew that this was just the beginning, but he was ready to fight. He was ready to protect the girls. He was ready to face his past. He was ready to finally live again. The riders reined in their horses a short distance from the cabin, kicking up dust that swirled in the air. There were 4 of them, their faces grim and determined. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face and a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously. "Caleb Morrison," he shouted, his voice booming across the plains. "We know you're in there. Come out with the girls, and we promise you won't get hurt." Caleb remained silent, his rifle trained on the sheriff. He didn't trust him. He knew that Harding's influence extended far beyond the orphanage walls. These men weren't here to uphold the law. They were here to silence the girls. "We have a warrant for the arrest of those children," the sheriff continued, his voice laced with impatience. "They're wanted for questioning in connection with a robbery at the orphanage." Caleb scoffed. "Robbery? That's a lie. You know why they ran. They saw Harding commit murder." The sheriff's face hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Morrison. You have any proof?" "I have their word," Caleb replied, his voice firm. "And that's good enough for me." "Their word against a respected member of the community?" The sheriff sneered. "You're making a big mistake, Morrison. You're interfering with the law." "The only law you're serving is Harding's," Caleb retorted. "You're as corrupt as he is." The sheriff's patience finally snapped. "All right, Morrison," he said, his voice menacing. "You asked for this." He signaled to his men, who dismounted and spread out around the cabin, their rifles raised. "This is your last chance, Morrison," the sheriff shouted. "Come out with the girls, or we're coming in." Caleb took a deep breath, his grip tightening on his rifle. He knew that there was no turning back now. He was committed to protecting the girls, no matter the cost. "You'll have to come and get us," Caleb shouted back, his voice filled with defiance. "And I promise you, you won't like what you find." The first shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. The battle had begun. The first shot whizzed past Caleb's head, splintering the wood of the doorframe. He ducked and returned fire, aiming at the sheriff, who was taking cover behind his horse. The battle was on. The cabin became a whirlwind of gunfire, the air thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. Bullets ripped through the walls, sending splinters flying. The girls huddled together in the corner, their faces buried in their knees, their bodies trembling with fear. Caleb moved quickly, firing from different positions, making it difficult for the lawmen to pinpoint his location. He was a skilled marksman, honed by years of hunting in the wilderness. He knew how to use the terrain to his advantage. He managed to wound one of the lawmen, who cried out in pain and stumbled back towards his horse. The other two continued to fire at the cabin, their bullets relentless. Caleb knew that he couldn't hold them off forever. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He needed to find a way to even the odds. He glanced at the girls, their faces etched with terror. He couldn't let them get hurt. He had to protect them, no matter what. He decided to take a risk. He waited for a lull in the gunfire, then burst out of the cabin, firing his rifle as he ran. He sprinted toward the nearby cluster of rocks, using them as cover. The lawmen were caught off guard by his sudden move. They hesitated for a moment, giving Caleb the opportunity to reach the rocks. He took cover behind them, reloading his rifle. From his new position, he had a better view of the battlefield. He could see the lawmen clearly, their movements predictable. He took aim and fired, hitting another one of them in the leg. The lawman screamed and fell to the ground. The sheriff, realizing that Caleb was a formidable opponent, ordered his remaining men to fall back. They mounted their horses and retreated, leaving their wounded comrades behind. Caleb watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. He had won the first battle, but he knew that it was far from over. Harding wouldn't give up that easily. He would be back with more men and more firepower. Caleb knew that he and the girls were in for a long and dangerous fight. He just hoped that he could keep them safe until it was all over. He looked at the girls and said, "It's okay for now." Caleb knew the respite wouldn't last long. After tending to the girls, ensuring they were unharmed, he surveyed the damage to the cabin. Bullet holes riddled the walls, and the door was barely hanging on its hinges. He needed to prepare for a much larger attack. He sent Sarah and the older girls to gather water from a nearby creek, instructing them to stay low and out of sight. He used the time to reinforce the cabin even further, piling rocks and dirt against the walls to create a more substantial barrier. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plains, Caleb saw them coming. This time, there were more men, at least a dozen, riding in a tight formation, their faces grim and determined. They were armed with rifles and shotguns, and some carried sticks of dynamite. Caleb knew that this was going to be a much tougher fight. He was severely outnumbered, and they had the firepower to destroy the cabin. He had to come up with a plan, and fast. He gathered the girls inside the cabin, their faces pale with fear. He tried to reassure them, but he knew that they could see the fear in his own eyes. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice firm. We just need to stay calm and stick together. He instructed them to stay low, away from the windows and doors. He told them to only use the rifle if they absolutely had to, and to aim carefully. He also revealed a hidden escape tunnel that he had dug years ago, a secret passage that led to a nearby ravine. If things get too bad, he said, you need to use this tunnel. It will take you to safety. The girls nodded, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that their lives depended on him. As the lawmen approached the cabin, Caleb took up his position by the door, his rifle in hand. He was ready to fight. He was ready to protect the girls. He was ready to face whatever came his way. He just hoped that he was good enough. This time, Harding had sent a clear message. Surrender was not an option. He was coming to take the girls one way or another. And Caleb was the only thing standing in his way. The end was coming. He knew it. But he would sell his life dearly to ensure the girls had a chance to escape. Caleb's knowledge of the land became their greatest asset. He wasn't just reinforcing the cabin. He was creating a defensive perimeter, using the natural terrain to his advantage. He knew every gully, every rock formation, every patch of scrub brush. He positioned the girls strategically within the cabin, ensuring they had clear lines of sight through the boarded-up windows. He instructed them to only fire when they had a clear shot and to conserve their ammunition. He then ventured out into the darkness, using his knowledge of the land to set up a series of traps and obstacles. He dug shallow pits and covered them with branches and leaves, creating hidden hazards for the approaching lawmen. He strung wire between trees, creating tripwires that would alert him to their movements. He also used his knowledge of the local wildlife to his advantage. He knew that a nearby pack of coyotes often hunted in the area. He imitated their calls, hoping to lure them closer to the cabin, creating a distraction for the lawmen. Back inside the cabin, he checked his ammunition, ensuring he had enough to last through the night. He cleaned his rifle, making sure it was in perfect working order. He sharpened his knife, a trusty companion that had served him well over the years. He looked at the girls, their faces pale but resolute. He knew that they were scared, but they were also brave. They had survived so much already. He wouldn't let them down. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He knew that the odds were stacked against him, but he refused to give up. He would fight to the death to protect the girls. He would use every trick he knew, every advantage he could find, to keep them safe. He heard the sound of approaching horses, the clatter of hooves on the rocky ground. The lawmen were getting closer. He gripped his rifle tighter, his heart pounding in his chest. The battle was about to begin. He whispered to the girls, "Remember the plan, and stay safe." He took one last look at them, their innocent faces illuminated by the dim light of the fire, and braced himself for the onslaught. It would be a long night, a night of blood and fire, a night that would change their lives forever. The night exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. The lawmen, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames of their torches, charged towards the cabin, their rifles blazing. Caleb, his senses heightened, returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. The battle raged for hours, the cabin besieged by a relentless barrage of bullets. The girls huddled together in the corner, their ears ringing, their bodies trembling with fear. But they held their ground, following Caleb's instructions, firing their rifle only when they had a clear shot. Caleb moved with a speed and agility that belied his age. He dodged bullets, leaped over obstacles, and used the terrain to his advantage. He was a one-man army, his skills honed by years of survival in the wilderness. The lawmen, despite their numbers, were struggling to break through Caleb's defenses. They stumbled into his traps, tripped over his wires, and were harassed by the howling coyotes that Caleb had lured to the area. But they kept coming, their determination fueled by Harding's promises of reward. They were desperate to get their hands on the girls, to silence them forever. As the battle wore on, Caleb began to tire. His body ached, his muscles screamed, and his ammunition was running low. He knew that he couldn't hold them off forever. He glanced at the girls, their faces pale but resolute. He couldn't let them down. He had to find a way to turn the tide of the battle. He noticed that the lawmen were focusing their fire on the front of the cabin, leaving the back relatively unguarded. He decided to take a gamble. He instructed the girls to cover him. Then he crawled out of the cabin through a small opening in the back wall. He moved quickly, silently, using the darkness to his advantage. He circled around behind the lawmen, positioning himself for a surprise attack. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. Then he charged, firing his rifle as he ran, catching the lawmen completely off guard. He was a whirlwind of fury, his knife flashing in the moonlight. He took down several lawmen before they even knew what was happening. The remaining lawmen, panicked and disoriented, began to fall back. Caleb pressed his advantage, pushing them further and further away from the cabin. He was determined to drive them off, to protect the girls. The battle raged on, the fate of Caleb and the girls hanging in the balance. It was a fight for survival, a fight for justice, a fight for redemption. And Caleb Morrison was ready to give it everything he had. The night was filled with the sounds of pain, rage, and sorrow. It was a symphony of death, but the lawmen were relentless. They regrouped, their numbers still overwhelming. They advanced again, their faces grim, their eyes filled with hate. Caleb, wounded and exhausted, knew that he couldn't hold them off much longer. He looked at the girls, their faces etched with fear and hope. He knew that their only chance of survival was to escape through the tunnel. But he also knew that the lawmen would pursue them, that they wouldn't stop until they had silenced them. He made a decision. He would sacrifice himself to give the girls a chance to escape. He would draw the lawmen away from the tunnel, giving the girls time to reach safety. He turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with love and determination. "Get the girls to the tunnel," he said, his voice hoarse. "Go now. Don't look back." Sarah hesitated, her eyes filled with tears. "But what about you, Caleb?" she asked. "I'll be right behind you," he lied, forcing a smile. "Just go. Get to safety." Sarah nodded, her face etched with grief. She gathered the girls and led them towards the hidden tunnel. Caleb watched them go, his heart aching with love and sorrow. He knew that he was sending them into the unknown, that he couldn't guarantee their safety. But he had to try. He had to give them a chance. He turned back to face the approaching lawmen, his rifle raised, his heart filled with defiance. He knew that he was outnumbered, that he was outgunned, that he was facing certain death. But he didn't care. He was ready to die to protect the girls. He unleashed a torrent of gunfire, his shots precise and deadly. He took down several lawmen, slowing their advance. But they kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. He felt a bullet tear through his shoulder, another graze his leg. He stumbled, but he refused to fall. He would fight to the end. He would give the girls every chance to escape. He knew that the end was near. He could feel it in his bones. But he had no regrets. He had found a purpose again. He had found a reason to live, and he was ready to die for it. He let out a defiant yell, a roar of defiance that echoed across the plains. He charged towards the lawmen, his rifle blazing, his knife flashing in the moonlight. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of fury. He would not go down without a fight. He would protect the girls, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He would be their guardian, their protector, their hero, and he would never give up. This was his final act, his sacrifice, his redemption. Caleb fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his body a whirlwind of motion, his rifle a weapon of deadly precision. But the lawmen were too many, their bullets too numerous. He felt another bullet tear through his flesh, this time in his side. He staggered, his vision blurring. He knew that the end was near. He could feel his life ebbing away, his strength fading. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He had done everything he could. He had protected the girls. He had found redemption. But then he heard a sound that cut through the cacophony of gunfire, a sound that filled him with hope. The sound of bugles, the sound of horses, the sound of cavalry. He opened his eyes, his vision clearing. In the distance, he saw them, a column of blue-clad soldiers, riding at full speed towards the cabin, their sabers flashing in the moonlight. The federal cavalry had arrived. The lawmen, caught completely off guard, were thrown into disarray. Some scattered, trying to escape, while others stood their ground, firing wildly at the approaching soldiers. The cavalry, led by a stern-faced captain, quickly surrounded the cabin, cutting off any chance of escape. The fighting was brief and brutal. The lawmen, outmatched and outgunned, were quickly subdued. The captain dismounted and approached Caleb, who was lying on the ground, his body riddled with bullets. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Caleb managed a weak smile. "I'll live," he said, his voice barely audible. "But those girls, they need your help. They're in the tunnel." The captain nodded and signaled to his men, who quickly located the hidden tunnel and began to search for the girls. Within minutes, they emerged, leading the 5 frightened but unharmed girls. Sarah ran to Caleb, her eyes filled with tears. "You saved us," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Caleb smiled, his heart filled with joy. "You were worth saving," he said. The captain turned to his men. "Arrest these men," he ordered, pointing to the captured lawmen. "They are to be charged with murder, corruption, and conspiracy." He then turned to Caleb. "We've been investigating Harding and his operation for months," he said. "We received a tip that he was planning to silence the girls. We arrived as soon as we could." The next day, Harding was apprehended at the orphanage. The truth about his crimes was revealed, his corruption exposed. The orphanage was shut down, and the remaining children were placed in safe and loving homes. Justice had finally been served. The nightmare was finally over. The federal troops had acted on information provided by a rival of Harding. They had been monitoring the situation from afar, awaiting the opportune moment to intervene. The arrival was not just luck, but the result of careful planning and precise timing. The cavalry had been instrumental in bringing Harding's criminal enterprise to an end. Caleb's wounds were severe, but he was alive. The cavalry doctors worked tirelessly to patch him up, tending to his injuries with skill and care. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his mind filled with images of the battle, of the girls' faces, of the approaching cavalry. When he finally awoke, he was lying in a clean, comfortable bed in the town's small infirmary. Sarah was sitting by his side, her hand clutching his. Her face lit up when she saw that he was awake. "Caleb," she cried, her voice filled with joy. "You're awake. You're going to be all right." Caleb smiled, his heart filled with warmth. "How are the other girls?" he asked. "They're fine," Sarah replied. "They're safe. They're being taken care of." "And you?" Caleb asked. "I'm fine too," Sarah said. "Thanks to you." Caleb looked at Sarah, at her brave face, her kind eyes. He realized that he had found something special, something that he had thought he had lost forever. He had found a family. He spent several weeks recovering from his wounds, his body slowly healing. But it wasn't just his body that was healing. His spirit was healing too. He had found a purpose again, a reason to live. He learned that the town had rallied around the girls, offering them food, clothing, and shelter. The community was determined to help them rebuild their lives. He also learned that Harding's assets had been seized and that the money was being used to establish a new orphanage, a safe and loving place for orphan children. Justice had truly been served. As Caleb regained his strength, he knew that he couldn't stay in the infirmary forever. He had to start planning for the future. He had to find a way to provide for the girls, to give them the life that they deserved. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't about to waste it. He felt the spark of life return to his weary soul. He was ready to face the future, no longer alone, but with a family to protect and cherish. The nightmares of the past began to fade, replaced by the hope of a brighter tomorrow. He was no longer digging his own grave, but building a new foundation for himself and the girls. With the help of the townspeople, Caleb began to rebuild his cabin, transforming it from a dilapidated shack into a cozy and welcoming home. The townsfolk donated supplies, furniture, and their time, eager to help Caleb and the girls start their new life. The girls thrived in their new environment. They attended the local school, made new friends, and blossomed into happy, confident young women. Caleb enrolled them in every activity they were interested in. He taught them how to read, write, and do arithmetic. They soaked up the knowledge like sponges. Caleb found work as a ranch hand, using his skills with horses and cattle to provide for the girls. He also started a small garden, growing vegetables and herbs that they could use for cooking. The cabin became a hub of activity, filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of delicious food. The girls helped with the chores, learning valuable life skills. They cooked, cleaned, and tended to the garden. Caleb made sure that the girls never forgot their past, but he also helped them to move on, to embrace their new future. He told them stories about his own family, about his wife and daughter, sharing his memories with them. He encouraged them to dream big, to pursue their passions, to never give up on their hopes and aspirations. He wanted them to know that they could achieve anything they set their minds to. As the years passed, Caleb watched the girls grow into strong, independent women. They were smart, kind, and compassionate. They were a credit to him. He realized that he had found what he had been searching for all along. He had found a family, a purpose, and a reason to live. He was no longer a grieving man, haunted by his past. He was a father, a protector, a hero. He had been given a second chance, and he had made the most of it. He had rebuilt his life, not just for himself, but for the girls. And he couldn't have been happier. The girls brought joy and laughter back into his life, filling the void left by his previous loss. He had found a new family, a family forged in the fires of adversity, a family that was bound together by love and loyalty. They were his everything, and he was theirs. Years later, Caleb sat on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple. The girls, now young women, were inside preparing dinner. Laughter spilled out of the open windows, filling the air with joy. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred, hands that had once held a pickaxe, ready to dig his own grave. Now, those same hands held a worn wooden carving, a gift from Sarah, depicting a family gathered around a cabin, bathed in the warm glow of a setting sun. He smiled, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had come a long way from that desolate day when he had been ready to give up on life. He had found redemption in the most unexpected of places, in the faces of 5 orphan girls who had needed his help. He had protected them, had fought for them, had given them a second chance. And in doing so, he had saved himself. He had found a new family, a new purpose, a new reason to live. The pain of his past still lingered, but it no longer consumed him. He had learned to live with it, to accept it as a part of who he was. He had found peace in the knowledge that he had made a difference, that he had brought light into the darkness. He had been broken, but he had been rebuilt. He had been lost, but he had been found. He had been ready to die, but he had chosen to live. And now, as he sat on his porch, surrounded by the love of his family, he knew that he had made the right choice. He had found redemption. He had overcome his past. He had found his place in the world. He was Caleb Morrison, a father, a protector, a hero, and he was finally at peace. He knew that his wife and daughter were smiling down upon him, proud of the man he had become. He had honored their memory by saving the lives of those 5 young girls. He was no longer the man who was digging his own grave. He was the man who had built a home, a family, and a future filled with love and hope. His journey was complete. His heart was full, and his life was finally worth living.